So this is actually one of my most favorite topics, nutrition. I love the science of nutrition. I don't love, I realized very early on that I didn't love clinical nutrition. Like, I didn't want to be a nutritionist. I didn't really want to work in a clinic. I didn't really want to work in a hospital, or it sounds terrible, but I didn't really want to work one-on-one with people for nutrition. I think the reason for that was because I'd already been working in the health and fitness industry for so long. I'd been working with people for, by the time I graduated from Deakin University with my nutrition qualification, I'd been in the industry for about 18 years. So I wasn't really wanting to work as a nutritionist. I just absolutely loved the science behind it. And I love sharing it. I love talking about it. I love the nuance around it. And I must admit, if I can put the frustration aside, I always have a bit of a giggle to myself when I see the latest diet or this or that, because ultimately they're just usually iterations of a previous diet. So for a little bit of background, so you also understand where I'm coming from, I was heavily involved in low carb, in the low carb world about 10 years ago. Thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. Pardon the pun. Aha, low carb, get it? Anyway, keep going. Anyway, so I ended up going into, I was really heavily involved in all the circles and all the stuff that goes on social media. And there was just some stuff that was going on in these groups that didn't really align with what I had learned at university. I'd done exercise science, so I hadn't gone deep into nutrition. So I was like, right, this doesn't sound right. There's some problems going on here. I think there is something in low carb, but there's also some nonsense going on. Anyway, I went and did my qualification with Deakin University. My most favorite thing I think I've ever studied. Absolutely loved it. And I'm really grateful for that, because it gave me an opportunity to look at research and the evidence and the science of nutrition and diets and whatnot. And it's helped me over the years distinguish what is factual versus what is, not sure about that, versus what is just crazy talk. Anyway, so whilst I am no longer within those low carb communities or circles, low carb, I believe, is an absolutely adequate diet. I just don't think you should say that it is superior to others, and I'm going to explain why that is a little bit later on. So let's get started. First and foremost, I believe in being able to give you what you need to know straight away, so you're not spending the whole time going, but Naomi, what is going on? First and foremost, if we look at nutrition or diets from a cognitive perspective, the first thing you need to know is that no diet wins outright. Now, you might be sitting there going, what? That sucks. Actually, no, that is wonderful news, because what that means is that there are many paths to good health. There are many paths to good cognitive health, healthy aging. And it is really going to be about what works best for you, following some, we're going to say rules, but following some general principles. That's probably a better way of putting it. And that's the third point there. That's all about adherence, because it's adherence that drives it. The number of times I hear people say, it would just work if they would stick to it. Yes, that's the point. What you're doing means they can't stick to it. We have to make it work for the person, not make the person work for it. And that's really where a lot of stuff falls down across the board, is that there are these really rigid dietary rules and restrictions and whatnot. And it's weird. People seem to love that when they first get started. You know, I chucked out everything in my cupboard, or even worse, I ate everything that was in my cupboard and I'm starting on Monday. That's probably my favorite. But, you know, the whole idea is I'm completely overhauling everything. And it's almost like people need those rules, because it's like it defines what they're doing. And when you sort of say, hey, how about we just only change a couple of things? It's almost like this completely unbelievable thought process that you could actually continue to eat what you normally eat, just with some tweaking. But that's the whole idea of adherence, and we'll get into that. So at the moment, there is no one single diet that appears to be superior for cognitive health, for healthy brain aging, for preventing dementia. But what we do know is that it looks like, or what we can, I guess, postulate, surmise, think about, is that there is a case for the vascular health, and that's cardiovascular health. So if we look at diets that reduce your blood pressure, improve your blood vessel health, your overall heart health, well, then that's probably going to also improve your brain health. That's a logical step. And given that high blood pressure or uncontrolled high blood pressure is the number one cause for strokes, and that having a stroke is the most significant risk factor for a type of dementia called vascular dementia, that's a fairly logical sequence. When we look at things like elevated LDL now being a modifiable risk factor for dementia, well, if we can eat foods that are going to improve our cholesterol profile, then we're probably going to see benefits from a cognitive perspective. So that's how we are going to address this tonight. So first and foremost, let's start with how your body actually uses food. This is just a really brief overview of nutrition science. So it's basically nutrition science in a few minutes, so bear with me. All right, so I don't know if anybody else hears this on social media, people getting quite upset when they talk about a calorie. A calorie is not just a calorie. Actually, yes, it is. A calorie is just a calorie. It is just a unit of energy. If I said to you, to get to my house, it's 1 kilometre. You just told me distance, that's it. I didn't tell you that to get to my house, you have to go up a hill that's like that, and you're not going to be able to drive it, so you're going to have your bungee gear to be able to get up it. Then up the top, there's a whole bunch of lions who are going to eat you. And then to get back down, you're going to have to paraglide. So that 1 kilometre now is looking pretty challenging. That information is helpful, right? If I say, oh, I'm just 1 kilometre away, you're like, oh, awesome, off we go. Actually, it's an insurmountable journey. You're not going to get to my house. So when we say a calorie is just a calorie, yes, it is. A calorie is just a calorie, but it tells you nothing about where it comes from. So we need 2 parts. Yes, a calorie is simply just a unit of energy, but we need to know where that unit of energy is coming from. A calorie of protein versus a calorie of carbohydrate versus a calorie of fat, they do behave differently in the body, as in carbohydrates behave differently, fats behave differently, and then protein behaves differently. The macronutrient composition of your food is very different. If I said to you, we're going to put you on a 1,200 calorie diet, one diet is going to be lots of vegetables, fruits, some meat, and then the other one's all McDonald's. We know that at the end of the diet, we're not going to have the same health status in both people. We know we're going to have one person who will have lost weight and be healthy. The other one will have lost weight, probably starving, probably not feeling very good about life, because they probably were only able to eat 1.5 meals a day, whereas the other one was able to eat quite a few meals per day. So a calorie is just a calorie, but we do need to know a bit more about the picture. In terms of how it's measured, we've got something called direct calorimetry. And essentially what that is you put in a chamber, and they look at temperature, and they're able to determine energy expenditure or the calories that you're burning. This can only really be done in research. It's very expensive, so we don't tend to do this. The other way that we do it is something called indirect calorimetry, and essentially what that is, also with direct calorimetry, what you can do is you get your food, you chuck it in a little sealed vat, it gets set on fire, and the food then burns, and they look at the temperature change in that little vat of water. Now that's fantastic because you've burnt the food, it's produced heat, you now know how much energy was in it. But we don't set our food on. Could you imagine if we set our food on fire inside our body? How exciting would that be? Every time you ate a chocolate bar, you'd be going through a menopausal flush every single year. You'd be dying every single time. So we can work out the energy that's in food, but then that's not a direct translation to the human body. We've then got to work out, okay, well, what does that food do inside of the human body? And that's where we use indirect calorimetry. And that's where you would have a mask over your face. And what this very crazy, effective, clever machine does is it looks at oxygen and carbon dioxide. And it's able to determine based on the composition, so how much oxygen you are taking in, how much carbon dioxide you're producing, because that then tells us, based on what you're breathing out, is what is being used for fuel. So as an example, when we use indirect calorimetry, it's basically metabolic testing. So it measures the oxygen you consume, the carbon dioxide you breathe out. And then if you're burning a mixed fuel, oh, hang on, sorry, someone's just come in. If you're burning a mixed fuel, roughly 1 litre of oxygen releases about 5 kilocalories. And so that way you can use oxygen consumption to give you an estimate of the energy spent. If you, and the ratio of carbon dioxide to oxygen tells you the mix. So as an example, if you have a ratio of 1, it usually means that you're burning mostly carbohydrate. If you've got a ratio of about 0.7, that means you're burning a lot of fat. And if you're about 0.8, it means that you're burning predominantly protein. So then we have something called Atwater factors, which is just the label conversions that you see on your food. They are approximations. So that's really important. Now, in Australia, we use kilocalories and kilojoules. In America, you'll see it's all calories. It's actually kilocalories. So 1 calorie is actually 1 kilocalorie. 1 calorie or 1 kilocalorie is 4.18 kilojoules. So it is just energy, or the unit of measurement that we use in Australia. Now, what's really important about food labeling, and this is probably one of the most important things I'll tell you tonight, is that they can be about 20%, up to 20% inaccurate. So it can be 20% over or 20% under. So when it comes to tracking and using food labels, just be mindful that it is still just an estimate. Okay. In terms of food or things that give you energy, we have 3 macronutrients, and then we have 4 energy yielding nutrients. So they're called macronutrients because we require them in such large quantities. Carbohydrate will give you 4 kilocalories per gram. Protein gives you 4 calories per gram. Fat gives you 9 calories per gram. And then alcohol, that sneaky little alcohol, gives you 7 calories per gram. Interestingly enough, there's also a study done on alcohol consumption. It was a few years ago now. And it actually activates a part of your brain that increases your hunger drive. So not only are you consuming all these extra calories while you're drinking, but it also sets off this hunger response in your body, and you tend to overeat with that. And then if you do overconsume in alcohol and you end up hungover the next day, you do then often try and eat your way out of that hangover. So when you're not feeling very well the next day, you tend to also overconsume in calories. So alcohol disrupts your sleep. Being tired also increases your hunger. So alcohol is a really great way to completely blow out your calories. Okay, so that's the energy that we take in from food. Where does our energy actually go? First and foremost, our major way in which we expend energy is called our basal metabolic rate. You can think of your basal metabolic rate as your engine. So if I go and turn the car on right now, I turn the engine on, I've got the music running, I've got the aircon going, but the car doesn't go anywhere. If I let that sit there for 24 hours but don't actually drive it anywhere, my fuel gauge will still go down. And that's because the car is still running, the engine is running. That's your basal metabolic rate. It does not take into consideration any movement at all. So it's the cost of your brain, breathing, heart rate, all the cellular processes inside of your body, basal metabolic rate. And it is a big energy expenditure. Then we have something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which I'll come to at the end. We've got the thermic effect of food. So when you eat your food and digest it, it actually costs energy. So it's not a passive process. Protein has the highest thermic effect. So it costs the body the most amount to digest. So it's protein has the highest, then carbohydrate, and then fat. And then we have something called exercise activity thermogenesis. And so this is just the exercise that you do, your structured exercise. So it's about 5 to 10% of your daily energy expenditure. Now, in some people, that can actually be 0 because they are not doing any exercise at all. So it should really say 0 to 10% because it is quite variable. Let's go back to NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You may have noticed that I'm a hand waver. When I talk, my hands go. I am a bit of a fidgeter. I tend to not sit still, so I'm usually wriggling around in my seat, my legs are going. That is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's also all the moving that you do around the house. So if you are cleaning or you're just moving from room to room, when you wake up in the morning, you go have your shower, all the movement associated with that. If you walk to the bus, walking upstairs. So every single bit of movement that you do that is not structured exercise, that is NEAT. And what's interesting about this is it's so widely variable. So 15 to 50%, it's huge. Researchers have looked into NEAT as a means of helping with weight loss because there is so much opportunity to increase your NEAT. So tonight I'm doing the webinar standing up. First of all, I've got a sore knee and sitting down sets it off. So I'm trying to not aggravate it too much, but also because standing is just such an easy way to increase your NEAT. And at the moment, I'm not getting to the gym as much as I would like. So I'm looking for those opportunities to increase my, my movement. But when we start to energy restrict, as an example, you become fatigued, you become a little bit tired. And so what we see is that your NEAT starts to go down. And this is what can cause problems for people when they're trying to lose weight, is that they think that they're in this energy deficit. But what actually happened was they did restrict their calories, but then their NEAT also was reduced. And so instead of being in this energy deficit now, they're just not moving as much. And that actually just ended up offsetting the calories that they weren't eating. So they ended up being in energy balance. So if you are trying to lose weight, you do actually need to consider your NEAT and be really purposeful with it. But that's a really interesting one. And this is just a little bit more about NEAT. So, you know, it can be up to 700 extra calories per day. Like that is 2 small meals, 1 meal and a snack. So trying to do that little bit of extra movement. And what's fantastic about it, it's not HIIT. It's not having to go and lift heavy weights. It is literally just trying to be a little bit more purposeful in your movement on a day-to-day basis, just moving around the house a little bit more. Even just standing up, even simply just standing up when you're working or getting up from your chair and, you know, if you've got to go do the photocopying, do it in sections. So rather than doing all your photocopying at once, be really inefficient. Break it up so that you're constantly having to get up and go and do that. So little things like that can actually end up making quite a big difference. And that's quite surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Okay, so let's talk about then with all that in the background. So that's, you know, that's what the food does. It's our energy source, the way in which, and then we've got how we actually use that energy. So let's talk about the diets that really have made headlines. And I think that's an important place to start. So really there are 3 main contenders here. We've got the Mediterranean diet, which actually appears quite a lot, and not just for brain health. It was originally built or designed rather for improving cardiovascular outcomes. And sorry, let me just go back to my notes. I want to make sure I don't miss anything here. Yeah. So it was modeled on the Mediterranean populations, and traditionally, originally it was designed for cardiovascular health. Then we have the DASH diet. So that's the dietary approach to stop hypertension. That's what DASH stands for. And the whole idea was to lower blood pressure. It was modeled on the Mediterranean diet. And it's, hang on, where did I put what it includes? Is that on the next slide? Yep, sorry, I'll come into that in the next slide. Got a couple of notes here that are a little bit all over the shop, thanks to Felix. And then we have the MIND diet. So the MIND is the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay. Man, some of these acronyms. Anyway, so it was developed by Martha Claire Morris at Rush University, and it was specifically intended for the brain. And it names 10 foods to favor. So it's got green leafy veg, other vegetables, berries, nuts, olive oil, whole grain, fish, beans, poultry, and wine, interestingly. And then it had 5 to limit, which was red meat, butter, stick margarine, cheese, pastries, sweets, and fried or fast food. So that was the MIND diet. Seems like we're talking about which diets were what. The DASH emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy while limiting sodium and added sugars, saturated fat, and red meat. So these were the three diets that have been looked at in terms of, do they offer cognitive improvements. So, the Mediterranean diet, we have good evidence to show that it actually is great for cardiovascular events. And I'm going to talk about why that matters in just a moment. So, the main trial was the PREDIMED trial, and that had about 7,500 Spanish older adults who were at high cardiovascular risk. And then roughly 30%, so the intervention group had roughly 30% fewer major cardiovascular events comparative to the control group. Now, there was a problem with that paper, and it did actually end up getting retracted. And then there was a problem with randomization. So there were people who weren't being randomized properly. So they retracted it. They sorted out, I think they took out about 1,000 people out of the study, reanalyzed it, but the result held. And that was really interesting. So even after they fixed the study up, they still found that the Mediterranean diet was associated with this significant risk in cardiovascular events, major cardiovascular events, so heart attacks and strokes as an example. They also found that people had less atrial fibrillation. That's right, I remember reading that. Interestingly, there was a trial that followed that, and that was called the PREDIMED Plus. And what it did was it tested an energy-reduced Mediterranean diet together with physical activity and gradual weight loss. So this was interesting because this is a multi-domain lifestyle intervention rather than just the diet on its own. And they actually found that this multi-domain intervention was more effective than just the dietary intervention alone, which is not really altogether all that surprising. When we look at the DASH diet, so the DASH diet has been shown to be effective at lowering blood pressure. So that has been shown numerous times in a number of different studies. So people who had these high levels of blood pressure, when they restricted their sodium in particular, they were then able, and then changed their diet, more fruits and vegetables, legumes, those sorts of things. They were able to improve their blood pressure, so systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and also were able to improve their LDL profile, which is also another important, or their cholesterol profile, which is another important cardiovascular marker. Then the researcher I was telling you about before, Martha Claire Morris, she put forward the MIND diet. And when she talked about it in research prior to this RCT, she did make some fairly large claims about how if people follow this diet, they should see X percent reduction in Alzheimer's disease. Anyway, unfortunately, that's not quite what happened. So, excuse me, they had 604 older adults, and their age span was 65 to 85. They were overweight with a family history of dementia and a self-reported suboptimal diet. So no one had cognitive impairment at the start. They were randomized to the MIND diet or to a control diet, and this was done over 3 years. So that's huge for a dietary intervention. So both groups were also coached to cut out about 250 calories per day. The primary outcome for this was change in global cognition. So that's just a cognitive, I guess it's a combination of all the domains of cognition. And then they did a battery of 12 cognitive tests and then also a brain MRI. At the end of the 3 years, there was no significant difference between both of those groups. In fact, both groups improved slightly. Now that's interesting because you're sitting there thinking, well, we had one who was doing this MIND diet and then one who was doing this control diet, and basically the similarity between both groups was they were told to cut 250 calories and they both slightly improved. And I think that's actually a really important takeaway. For a lot of people, one of the most significant and substantial things you can do is weight loss. So if you are overweight or if you have obesity, one of the more important things you can do is try and lose weight. Now, as always, that is easier said than done. And I have worked with thousands of people over the years, particularly women, who have really battled through this. And that's why what I'm talking about, particularly in the next few slides, is so important. So what we can take away from this was that when they looked at this diet that was specifically designed for cognitive outcomes or for improving cognition, preventing Alzheimer's, they found no difference between the control group and the intervention group, but both lost weight and both had slight improvements in cognition. And I think that's a really important thing. So, and I'll talk about it again a little bit more coming up, but most importantly, you need to find something that, number one, you can stick to. Number one, that doesn't feel like a diet, because when you do feel like it's a diet and you do feel like there's a lot of rules and you do feel restricted, motivation only gets you so far. Self-control only gets you so far, and then it's frustrating. And weight loss is such a difficult, challenging process. And we live in this obesogenic environment where we have got food available to us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At the press of a button, we can literally have food ordered directly to our house. It is hard to lose weight. So we do need to find something that is just effortless. And it can be effortless. Sticking to something can be effortless when you find the right thing. I will say that weight loss is never effortless. Don't ever think that's what I said, because that is definitely not what I said. Weight loss is hard. Okay, sorry, that was just a summation of the mind trial. Okay, so this is where I have landed from a dietary perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. If you eat for your cardiovascular health, you are going to support your brain health. So your brain is exposed to how you eat for three main reasons. Number one, it is highly vascular. Number two, it is energy hungry. And three, it is diet sensitive. So what does that mean? Our brain is surrounded by all of these little blood vessels. And when those blood vessels are damaged, they are what is directly delivering nutrients, taking away waste products. And if it can't do that properly, then you are leaving that part of the brain exposed, and you're going to end up with damage on the brain. And that's what would lead to things called white matter hyperintensities. So if you had a brain scan and you can see these little white spots on your brain, that usually means that there's been some sort of damage done to that brain. And that is a vascular related problem. High blood pressure, problems with your lipid profile, so elevated cholesterol, having too much glucose in your blood, all these things can cause these problems on your brain. Your brain's also really energy hungry. So your brain is only about 2% of your total body weight, but it's using about a fifth of your energy, and it doesn't have any energy reserves. So it's relying on these blood vessels to constantly deliver energy, nutrients, and then remove waste. So it is a very real living organ that has this constant need and constant supply of blood, oxygen, nutrients, those sorts of things. It's also diet sensitive. So our blood pressure, our glucose, our lipids, these all directly respond to how we eat. How we eat absolutely changes them. So there is a really good case for changing your diet to improve these substances in your blood, to improve the health of your blood vessels, and then to make sure that you are supporting and nourishing and protecting your brain. Okay, so now what we can say, healthful eating absolutely lowers your cardiovascular risk. So if we've got patterns that are rich in vegetables, legumes, whole grains, hang on, we've just got, let me see where that's coming from. There we go. So if oh no, we're back again. Oh, we're off again. All right. See if that, oops, get back. Sorry. Okay. All right. So we are looking at things like vegetables, legumes. So legumes are your beans, peas, those sorts of foods. So as an example, when I have my tacos, I like to have, and this might be me showing my age, but I love refried beans. So I have that in with my tacos and my burritos. Great way to get some legumes in. Chickpeas are another one. I love chickpeas in my salad. Another great option. Things like whole grains, fish, healthy fats. These things have been shown to reduce your blood pressure, improve your lipids. So we're pretty confident about that. Link two, we know that cardiovascular risk harms the brain. So again, the same blood vessel damage that drives heart disease, it is also then going to affect the brain, and it is linked to cognitive decline. We know that. So then plausibly, this way of eating is going to support the brain. But we are talking plausible here. This is an inference. We don't have good randomized control trials that show us this. So what we're thinking is that if we eat this way and it supports our blood vessels, which then support the heart, and that's going to support the brain, that makes a lot of sense. And that's where we are. But this is the most important thing. We don't have any diet at the moment that has been shown to prevent dementia. What we see are these dietary patterns associated with lower rates of dementia. Hang on. Coralie, your microphone keeps unmuting. I need you to keep it muted, if possible, please. Okay. Oops, sorry, I've gone past it again. All right. So eat for vascular health, good for your heart, good for lowering your cardiovascular disease, very, very likely then that it's going to also protect your brain. And then we know that there is not that one single diet that prevents dementia, but it is likely that those healthful patterns that we talked about are able to protect our brain as we age and lower our risk. So we can see that people who do eat in certain ways have lower risks or lower rates of dementia, but that doesn't mean that those diets are preventing dementia. When we look at population level data, we can look at patterns. So we have patterns that people who are more physically active, people who've got a higher aerobic fitness, people who don't smoke, people who eat more fruits and vegetables and legumes, people who eat diets lower in processed foods, or that's very emerging still. But we can start to see these patterns are associated with lower rates of dementia. Now, is it one single thing that lowers your risk for dementia, or is it likely that it's a combination? And it's likely a combination. It's likely that the diet is one part, the exercise is the other. Diet and exercise both impact upon our sleep. That's also important. It's likely that people who are eating well and exercising, they might have lower levels of stress. They might have lower levels of mental health related problems. So there's a number of things that are going on. It's also the other way around, that people who have mental health related problems aren't able to exercise or aren't able to eat well because of how they're feeling. So it's quite a complex little web there, and it can be quite challenging at times to work out what is doing what. And it's more than likely it is a combination of things that lowers our overall risk. All right, so let's talk about low carb, low fat, and fasting, because I do get asked about these a lot. Now, really interestingly, there was a meta-analysis that looked at 14 popular diets. They compared them head to head, and what they actually found, they all work. Yay! And it's so interesting because we fight about it. Academics, fitness professionals, health professionals fight about it online, when really this is fantastic news, because it shows us that we can adopt any dietary pattern we want, so long as it's got enough protein in it, so long as it's got the fruits and the vegetables, the legumes, the dairy. It's not too high in fat. It's not too high in salt. If you're salt sensitive, you're not eating a lot of processed foods, and you're probably going to be pretty healthy. That is actually a really empowering message, particularly for people who find it hard to stick to one particular diet. So what they found in this meta-analysis was that at 6 months, all of them were about the same. All of them were about the same in terms of weight loss and blood pressure improvements. Once they got to 12 months though, most of the difference, the weight loss had diminished, and then also the blood pressure changes had also gone away. However, the authors were not able to work out whether people were still sticking to the diet at 12 months. So they didn't know whether they were still adhering. And based on what I know about nutrition science, I would say they probably weren't sticking to it at 12 months. They probably were still doing it at 6 months, and then by 12 months, you tend to sort of go, nah, too hard. And so it's more likely that it was adherence that was meaning, or the lack of adherence was why we weren't seeing any results at that 12-month time point. So the good news is you can find really whatever it is that you are currently doing, just think to yourself, how do I get some more fruits and vegetables in? How do I get some more lean meats in? Am I eating too much salt? And if you're eating a lot of packet foods like your chips and chocolates and lollies and biscuits and all those sorts of things, you probably are over consuming on salt. And if you just cut those out, you're probably fine. It's not about the salt that you put on your food. It's more about all of the processed packaged foods that you're consuming that will naturally drive up your salt. Okay, I've just got on here just an infographic about the study for anyone who is interested. So everyone can have these slides if they want them. I don't know who's interested in reading these slides afterwards, but they're yours if you want them. So the other things that I do get asked about, ketogenic diets. This is a really interesting one. So from the perspective of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, there's no evidence at the moment that these are better than any other approach. As I said before, we don't seem to have any sort of dietary intervention. Definitely no dietary intervention to prevent it, but we don't really have any evidence at the moment that the ketogenic diet also slows it down. However, just because we don't have evidence for it now doesn't mean it's not being investigated and doesn't mean that it's not possible or plausible. And that's why it's uncertain. I mean, the ketogenic diet logically makes sense. Ketogenic diet causes your brain to use ketones instead of glucose. Part of the problem with Alzheimer's disease is that you see dysregulation in the brain around glucose and insulin. So you've got this insulin resistance going on also at the brain. So, I mean, there is a plausible mechanism for it. What's also interesting is the ketogenic diets are being investigated currently for glioblastomas, which is a very aggressive brain cancer. So that's interesting. So there is something in ketogenic diets and brain health. So that's one that I would probably put in the uncertain. If I was really worried about my own brain health, if I was really worried about my cognition, if I'd been diagnosed with MCI, I probably would switch to keto just because I would throw everything at it. And I would be willing to do my own N=1 on that. So that's just my personal opinion on it. When it comes to fasting and time-restricted eating, this is really interesting. There is evidence to suggest that overall calorie restriction is associated with longevity or a healthier lifespan. Fasting is just an alternative to time-restricted eating. I fast. It's just something I've done forever and a day. I tend to have my first meal from 10 a.m. onwards. Some days it's earlier than that. Like if I've got to go to the gym, I usually eat a little bit earlier in the day. If I'm hungry, I will eat, but generally speaking, it's sometime between about 10 and 12, and some days it's even later. It's sometimes not till 2 o'clock. It just works for me. It always has. It's just a natural way of eating for me. It is just a tool. You don't have to do it. There is evidence to show that it is just as effective as overall calorie restriction or continuous calorie restriction. However, you've just got to make sure that you're eating enough protein. So the problem with fasting and time-restricted eating is that you can end up, because your feeding window is smaller, you can find it hard to get the right amount of protein in your feeding window. So as long as you can do that, go for it. There's also research going on at the moment with the gut-brain axis. I'm particularly interested in this. I think it's super interesting. I listened to a podcast recently about it and my brain is ticking over. I think that a really great strategy is just making sure you're eating adequate fiber, having a look at prebiotic fibers, and then supplementing with probiotics if you've had to take a course of antibiotics or if you've been unwell. This is something that I don't know enough about to speak confidently on, but I think that there is something there. There has been research into diets, into depression, and they've seen really great improvements in changing diets and improving depression symptoms. So there is a plausible approach here for dementia and other neurodegenerative diseases. That's something that I'm really keen to see more research being done on. Then we've got alcohol. We know that alcohol really is a big problem when it does come to dementia. So excessive alcohol consumption is one of the modifiable risk factors that the Lancet Commission identified recently. So if you are over consuming on alcohol, that is something that I would be trying to address very quickly. In terms of how much alcohol is safe, it's probably nothing. That's probably the safe amount. But for women, it's no more than 2 standard drinks in a sitting. And I can't remember how many days per week that is. But the alcohol, the amount of alcohol we can actually consume is actually quite small. Okay. Alrighty. Supplements. So you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed by the supplement slides as well. Sadly, there is not a lot going on at the moment, which is a bit, I think it's good. I actually think it's really good. Okay, so first of all, supplements really should, the first thing that we need to be looking at is our diet, first and foremost. If you are trying to fix what your diet can do, that I think is a problem. We need to be really genuinely trying to improve our diet first and then replacing what's missing. There are situations where people have food avoidances or allergies or illness or something's going on and they just don't have access to the food that they need. And I think supplements are a fantastic alternative in those cases. But generally speaking, we should try and improve our diet first and then identify if we are deficient somewhere. Now, in terms of identifying deficiency, that really is something that you need to go and see your doctor about. You go and get a blood test and just see where you're at the moment, because there are some deficiencies that actually do impact upon our cognition. So as an example, vitamin B12 deficiency absolutely can cause cognitive impairment. So if you did have a vitamin B12 deficiency, that would actually be something that would be worthwhile supplementing, not worthwhile. You would absolutely need to get that fixed. Vitamin D is an interesting one. We do have great evidence for bones. From a cognition perspective, it's not, we don't have a lot of trials that have shown benefit for cognition, but the reason why I've included it in this slide is that in winter, we do tend to become vitamin D deficient, particularly here in Australia. So it may be worthwhile supplementing with it and seeing if you notice any perceivable benefits if you're deficient. Omega-3, this is a bit of a mixed one. There is some research that shows it is good for cognition. There is some that shows no effect. If you can eat fatty fish a few times per week, that's a great starting point. Otherwise, you can supplement with omega-3 fish oil. Creatine, everyone's going bonkers for creatine at the moment. And look, I love creatine. I take it every single day. However, I would like just to point out that it is absolutely, we know it's effective for muscle. We just don't know at the moment whether it has cognitive benefits. That's still emerging. We're still trying to learn about that at the moment. Magnesium is another one. It is likely that a lot of people are deficient in magnesium, and then there is an important role that magnesium plays in terms of blood pressure. So from a vascular perspective, it is likely that if you don't have enough magnesium in your supplement, you're going to get vascular benefits for that. So you're going to improve your cardiovascular health. So that one might be worth trying as well. Oops. Oops, hang on, sorry. There are some others that are showing, I've got omega-3 twice. Good on me. B vitamins is another one that may actually be of benefit. There was an interesting study into a multivitamin. So the Cosmos study, they did find a small but consistent benefit for memory and global cognition. So that was just a multivitamin, which I thought was really interesting. Ginkgo biloba, I always say that incorrectly. Unfortunately, not really a lot of evidence for that one, although it has been researched quite a lot. Omega-3 we've already talked about, and then curcumin and nootropics. This is interesting. So I think what's really important to understand here with the world of supplements is that it's fairly fast moving. There's a lot of things that are currently being investigated. I think they're worth watching. I think it's worth following the research. And I also think that if they are safe, you could try them on yourself and just see whether or not they work. One thing to point out that's really important when we are testing things on ourselves, you can't change anything else in your life except that one thing. So if you want to try curcumin as an example, you can't change anything else. You can only add the curcumin in and then do everything else the same. You might decide to try it for 12 weeks. So that's 12 weeks where you have to be consistent and change nothing else, and then decide how it is you're measuring benefit. Is that a blood test at baseline? Take it for 12 weeks and another blood test. Are you going to use how you feel? Are you going to use some other marker? So you've got to decide what is the outcome that you want, or you want to test by taking these supplements. Nobody does that. Everybody just takes supplements and go, I don't know if it works, but I'm just going to take it anyway. That's not necessarily a problem, but so long as it doesn't cause you any side effects. And there are some that actually do. If you go over to the next slide, the NMM, the NADs, they actually do have substantial and significant and uncomfortable side effects. You have to decide for yourself whether or not you are willing to, experience those side effects. There's also substantial cost that goes with it. And in terms of the human evidence, there might be animal evidence, and there would be animal evidence behind some of these. But the human evidence is so small at the moment, and the supplement companies usually are getting ahead of the claims. And I think it's important to watch. And I think if you are going to take them, I actually have no problem with that. And I actually think it's really exciting when people want to test things on themselves. But you've just got to remember, how are you testing this on yourself? How are you going to make sure that there is benefit? Because if you're going to suffer side effects, if you're going to spend money, and potentially you've got to remember that anything that gives you benefit, it can also cause harm. So you have to take that risk. So if you're going to do all those things, you need to have a really objective way of working out, hey, is it actually doing anything for me? Otherwise, that $100 a month that you're spending on it, you may as well set it on fire. And you could actually be causing yourself some long-term damage. We just don't know. And I think you've just got to make the decision from an educated standpoint. So again, not against it. I just think you need to go in with your eyes wide open, and you need to be really smart about how it is you're measuring benefit. What outcome are you looking for? Quality of life, sleep improvement, anxiety reduction, weight loss, less pain, improved gym performance, improved blood markers. And even if your blood markers did improve, what does that mean? Does it mean anything? And this is the problem that I have with some of these supplements. They're like, oh, someone's blood measures were improved by X, Y, Z. Well, that's great. I'm glad that their blood markers are now better. But did that translate to an improved, clinical outcome? Like, did they feel better? Were they in less pain? Were they sleeping better? Those things are really important. So just make sure you know what you're going to test before you start, jamming in some of these supplements. Next point is natural does not mean risk-free, and that's really, really important. So I've just got some of the side effects that can happen with some of these supplements that people don't realize can actually be dangerous when taken in excess. So as an example, zinc over long term can cause a copper deficiency. Any vitamin that is fat soluble can build up in your fat and cause toxicity. So that's A, E, D, and K. You've also got things like vitamin K interferes with warfarin, which is a blood thinner. You've got St. John's wort disrupting other prescription medications. So before you ever start to take any supplement, please go and have a chat to your doctor and just make sure that it is safe and that it is actually okay in your situation. Okay, so what actually works? Great question. What actually works? And it is adherence. Okay, so one of the most important things is being able to figure out your own numbers. Now, I am going to be really honest here. I don't track. I'm really, really bad at all that sort of stuff. When I have to track my numbers or work out my calories and macros, I'm actually really, really slack. So what I tend to do is I tend to look at my protein target rather than my calories. However, I know what I should be eating. So I roughly know that I need to, if I want to lose a little bit of weight, I need to be eating about 1,800 calories a day. I know that my protein target is about-ish 110-ish grams per day. And my deficit really, I want it to be about, that 1,800 is about a 10% deficit. So I'm not going in some, you know, crazy 500 calorie deficit. I'm just going to use a percentage, and I tend to use like a 10%. So I want to show you something really quickly, because this is the lazy person's. I eat mine. Hang on, let me just stop sharing for 2 seconds. Where did it go? Here, no, that's not it. Okay, I'll share screen again. Fine. Okay, so this was me just before, because this is how lazy I am. Hi Joy, could you log my breakfast please? I had rissoles which were left over from dinner last night. The recipe was about a kilo of, actually it was about 500 grams of ground beef. Couldn't even remember what I ate. Of pork mince. Then it was about a small onion, garlic, salt, pepper, maybe a quarter cup of breadcrumbs, some Worcestershire sauce. It probably made about, say, 15 rissoles, and I had 2. I just skipped through some of it because I was going through and actually logging all my food, and it was just taking ages. So I've just cut and spliced it a little bit. So I put in my smoothie. A half a cup of cooked rice, a half a cup of Aldi butter chicken, half a cup of Aldi musselman curry, and then about a quarter of the Aldi naan. Joy, can you tell me what my daily total is and what I have left over? Thank you, in terms of calories and macros. So from here, what I did was I just wanted to know, what had I eaten? What did I have left? And then I was like, all right, tell me, what should I eat? And I got a suggestion of some Greek yogurt and fruit, which I... Nutrition area. If we go to our food diary. And so it's now sitting in my food diary. There's my logged foods. Food for today. And this is all based on my calories and macros, which I have popped in here. So Joy works off that. Okay, so for me, I need something, like I just needed it to be something really super simple, because I'm just not going to do it. I'm just lazy when it comes to food and stuff like that. So I just needed something really, really quick. And the reason why that actually matters is because we know from research that there are certain behaviors that help people lose weight and then keep it off, right? And one of the things that has been identified is that people who lose weight, keep it off long term, they do these sorts of behaviors. So they do continuous self-monitoring and tracking. I'm really bad at logging my food, but I will do that via voice prompt. So I will now track my food, and this will be, and it's not, again, I've got to take into consideration that there is a 20% error each side. So it might be 20% over, 20% under. But what I can start doing now is I can start seeing what I'm eating over time, and I'm going to include everything, because I would like to lose a few kilos. And I know that I'm really bad at like logging onto my Fitness Pal and then going through the process of putting it all in. If I can just verbally tell Joy what I'm eating, and she's going to stick that in there for me, I know I will do this for a much longer time. So there's my continuous self-monitoring. The food diaries I think are great because they just give you a quick little visual representation of what you're doing. Other things that really help, and this is something that does help with our family, is the meal planning. So we will actually sit down and write out everything we're going to eat for the week, and then I shop accordingly. So it means then that we've got most of what we need for the week, and we're not always having to go backwards and forwards. I know when we're busy, and we've got the quick and easy meals for those nights. Other things that are important is the personal goals. So we're having these iterations of goals. So this is my goal for now, and then I'm going to have another one and another one. They also had a shift in identity. So many talked about this idea of reinvention. They found a community, and that's really, really exciting. So they really threw themselves into this experience, and that's how they were able to lose weight and then keep it off long term. And then they had this external accountability as well. So they had peer groups or a health professional that was helping them. And then those who did regain, they found it hard to prioritize tracking and they let it lapse. They turned to food to manage stress, boredom, and emotion. They had the lack of planning. They had difficulty putting their own goals above other people's wishes. So if you think about us as a society, how many times have you gone out for dinner or gone and done something because that's what everyone wanted to do, and you kind of just went, oh, well, this is what we're doing. And then they also found that the weight fluctuations were draining their motivation. And I think that if you for yourself, if you think about the food that you're eating and you think about what your goals are and you think about how it is you're going to achieve them, you know that your weight's going to fluctuate. You know that things are going to go up and down. And if you just try and zoom out and have this really long-term perspective of what you're doing, it means if you sit down with a packet of chips one night and smash the whole thing, it doesn't really matter because we're looking at things from a big point of view. And if you look at the whole week as an example, there was lots of vegetables, lots of legumes, meats and poultry and seafood, all the things that you've been eating. That packet of chips now, that's just one small part of an overall, otherwise very healthy diet. And sometimes we end up getting, so lost in the micro, the individual meals or the components of the meals, we forget to, sort of zoom back and take a big look or a longer look at what we've been doing over, days, weeks, months. And I think that is really important. So when it comes to long-term adherence to any dietary pattern, tracking is just a tool. For some people, it's no good, and that's really important. And there's many ways to track. People think immediately, oh, I've got to track my food. Well, no, sometimes it's like tracking your weight, or you've got the pair of pants or whatever that you wear that tells you whether you're on track or not. So there's a number of ways for you to track that helps you decide whether or not you're on the right track or not. And when it comes to, calorie counting, that is just, I don't calorie count. I look at how much food's on my plate. I've got a rough idea of how much I'm eating, and I try and be a bit more purposeful with how much I eat. And that has worked for me. May not work for the next person. So we've got to just find these approaches that work. And ultimately, if you find a way of eating that you can stick to, that isn't burdensome, that doesn't make you anxious, that improves your metabolic health, so your glucose, your blood pressure, your lipid profile, that supports your blood vessels, so it brings your blood pressure down and it helps bring your waist circumference down. This is very likely something that will protect your brain. And then if it's not burdensome, if you think, oh, actually this is not too bad, you're probably going to stick to it for a really long time. And that's what the goal really is. So from our perspective, we do we recommend a Mediterranean style pattern. And the reason why I say Mediterranean style, the Mediterranean diet has been found to be beneficial. So we're thinking, again, all the same foods that I've talked about before. It is a very flexible approach. You find what suits you. So if you say, Naomi, I hate vegetables. Okay, all right, we can work with that. So rather than vegetables, think about fruits, think about salads, think about whole grains and other foods that you can eat that supplement that. And if you are a person who finds it hard to eat a whole bunch of different foods, well then you know what, maybe you are taking a multivitamin, maybe you are looking at a supplement. So it's about how do we improve what you're doing and how do we do something that's realistic. The other things to think about obviously then are the movement, NEAT, exercise, weight training, those sorts of things. When it comes to supplementing, identify any deficiencies and treat those. If you want to try other things, certainly do. However, just be really purposeful with what you're doing and don't just throw everything against a wall, because if you do start feeling better, which one was it that had the benefit? And then you're stuck with a million supplements that you've got to keep taking because you don't know which one was beneficial. And then think about ultimately what is not just the diet, but what is the lifestyle that you can see yourself doing in a year, because that's what you want to be doing now. Start with the bare minimum, and then as you start to feel better, as you get used to it, you can add from there. So rather than, trying to hit the ceiling first, start at the floor and then just work your way up. All right, guys. Now, I have got on here, ask me the hard ones. However, it is 8:30 at night. So if you would not ask me the super hard ones, that would be fantastic. I would really appreciate that because my brain is a little bit of mush. But if you do have any questions, I'm really sorry. I didn't see if anything did come up in the chat. But if you do have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to go and enjoy the rest of your night. Remembering that, thank you, Ruth. Just remember that this will be recorded. If you've got any questions, I will be absolutely available for answering them in the Healthy Aging Project. You can contact me via email or other social media channels. You can also chat to me on WhatsApp in our walking groups. So if you're not in a walking group, on WhatsApp, we have different regions where people get together and have a walk. So you can chat to me on there as well. Protein powders, shakes, beneficial. Listen, that will depend on the scientist you talk to. This scientist says, I love them because remember I said before, I am lazy. I am super lazy and I'm going for easy options. So I have a smoothie just about every single morning. And with my smoothie, I do protein powder, strawberries, milk, my creatine, because creatine is disgusting and it makes everything gritty. So I can't taste it in my smoothie. I also do beta-alanine because I do high intensity work and I find that helps. And sometimes when I'm feeling really healthy, I chuck in some frozen spinach, but that's rare. And that's what I have. So I like the protein powder because it just makes my life a little bit easier. And it just makes sure that I am getting my overall protein needs. Oh, cravings and overcoming them. Do you know, I find for me, mine are nighttime. So mine is a time of day induced craving. So sometimes what I do is I brush my teeth and I put that one block in front of me. Sometimes I send myself to bed. Literally, I'm like, I just need to go to bed. That's all it is. I'm tired and I'm just, going to eat something I don't want to. Other times when it's sweet, and I know how much of a nutritionist dork this makes me sound like, but I try fruit first because what I actually find is when I do eat ice cream or chocolate, it actually usually ends up making me feel unwell. And so I find if I have the fruit, it gives me the sweet I want, it gives me the water, and then it doesn't upset my stomach at all. In terms of otherwise, the cravings and whatnot, it is a behavioral thing. It's a learned thing. It really takes a lot of discipline and self-control to unlearn them. And there's no easy way to do that. Try and distract yourself. That's honestly what I try and do a lot of the time. Hi, Coralie. Yes, definitely. You will absolutely wanted chocolate, but just ate an apple. Pretty much. That's literally what I do. I go and eat some straw. Actually, okay. I do have one. Those little. I've been eating my children's little chocolate mousses. Those little kids' choc mousses, and they're about that big. And they've got I think in the at Woolies, it's got a picture of a minion on it, and it's this delicious little. It's so small. It's about 90 grams, right? I get my strawberries. I dip them in the chocolate mousse, and then I eat the strawberries. And I have about 4, maybe 5 strawberries, and I dip them into my chocolate mousse, and it is perfect. I do that sometimes if I'm like, no, I really need proper sugar. Proper sugar. Fruit is proper sugar, you know what I mean? Coralie, yes. I will give you the slides and you can also have the recording. Yes, Belinda, I said beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is a buffer. And what it does is it lowers your blood pH a little bit. Not a lot because it'd kill you otherwise. So just a little bit so that when you're doing the high intensity exercise and you're building up these hydrogen ions, which make your blood more acidic, hang on, I went the wrong way. It makes you more alkaline to begin with, so that when you're doing the high intensity exercise and it makes your blood more acidic, it takes longer for that acidity to interfere with your muscle contraction. So it acts as a buffer. So you can do the higher intensity exercise for longer. However, just be mindful with beta-alanine, it makes your face tingle. So if you take it and you're not aware, you might be thinking you're having an allergic reaction. You're not. It's just the beta, or you might be, so be careful with that. But generally, it's just like your lips tingling and it gets a bit weird. So just be careful with that. But again, don't take a supplement without talking to your doctor first. 10 grams of creatine. Listen, Chris, I am throwing a number into the ethos at the moment. 5 grams is what we know we would use for muscle. I've done 10 because that's all I can tolerate in one go. In studies, it's I think somewhere around 20 grams, but I have not seen anything showing that it is safe to take 20 grams of creatine indefinitely. So I'm not quite willing to do that to myself yet. I mean, I'm willing to try a lot of things on myself, but I don't know about 20 grams of creatine just yet. I also find that creatine sometimes does make my tummy feel a bit weird. And I don't want to have, between the beta alanine, which can also cause explosive diarrhea, I don't need creatine doing that, and beta alanine. That would just be a disaster. So I just use VPA. I'd get nothing from VPA by recommending them. Once upon a time, I did actually have VPA send me a whole bunch of products to be one of their ambassadors. But then they started sending me products that I didn't want to have anything to do with. And so I emailed them and said, I don't want to be your ambassador anymore, but I'll just keep buying you the products that I like. So I've used VPA for, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. They are not as cheap as they used to be, but they are Brisbane, Australian, good quality. They taste good. They've got a good range. So I'm pretty happy with that. Alrighty. Any other questions? Have I missed anything? Uh, Oh yeah, what is Yeah, VPA? I don't even know what VPA stands for. That's just their brand. All right, guys. Well, I do you think? NMM. This is an interesting one. I am watching this one. Currently, I would not take it because it does cause side effects, and I'm a sook, and I don't like side effects. I don't have time to be unwell. I don't have time for anything like that. It's also quite expensive. And it usually comes in blends. And my problem with blends is what is doing what? Is the NMM working, NMN working, or is it something else that is working? So I don't know. I'm watching it. I think if you want to try it, run it by your doctor first and then have a crack and see what you think. But for me, I won't take it just yet. Collagen or collagen peptides for bone. Yeah, this is interesting. Collagen peptides, there's a study that actually I read just recently on collagen peptides for bone. There is some evidence on that. Ruth, I will have to find that study for you. I read it maybe a week or two ago. So, of course, I can't remember what it was. But, oh, no, it was in the Healthy Aging Project. Someone asked about it and I found it. Yeah, definitely. So remind me on that, Ruth, and I will get back to you on that. I also have sorted out all those bugs that you sent me, so everything should be working again. Ruth, thank you for the feedback. I will comment back and let you know that it's all done. All right, guys. Oh, pleasure. Karen, my absolute pleasure. Lovely seeing you. Lovely seeing you, Warren. Um, oh, enjoy dinner. Chris, nice to see you. All right, bye everyone. Enjoy your evening.